Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the passive voice. But before moving to the lesson itself, we need to highlight a few points to make things clear before we start with the details. Lots of students confuse passive voice with reported speech. Now, we need to remember this. In reported speech, no matter what the tense, we have to shift it a step backwards. Just like in the car, when you shift the car stick to R, what happens to it? The car moves backwards. So from now on, let's remember reported speech like reversing the car, moving backwards. As for passive voice, in passive, we keep the tense as is and we do all the necessary changes. So, if the sentence is in present simple, if the active sentence is in present simple, so we keep the tense as is and then we change it into passive. If it's present perfect, past continuous, whatever the tense, keep it as is and then we change it into passive voice. Now, the second point that we need to talk about is that why do we use passive voice? Now, there are many reasons why we use passive voice. The first one is that because the person who carries out the action is either unknown or unimportant. For example, when I say coffee beans are grown in Brazil, do we really need to know who grows coffee beans in Brazil? Of course not. We care about the object itself and what happened to it. As for the doer of the action, the person who did that, irrelevant. So this is the first reason. The agent is either unknown or unimportant. Now, there is a second reason why we use passive voice. Passive voice is used, that is, when we refer to something unpleasant and we either don't know who did that action or we avoid telling who did the action as a kind of, politeness. So, for example, when we say a lot of mistakes have been made, instead of saying you have made a lot of mistakes, so we avoid mentioning the doer of the action out of politeness. Now, the third point why we use passive voice is that because we care about the action itself rather than the doer of the action. For example, and that's, by the way, what we see in news headlines, in newspapers, etc. That is, the action and the object that received that action are more important than the doer of the action itself. For example, when we say the concert will be attended by the Prime Minister, I don't care about the Prime Minister in here. I care about the concert being attended by whoever comes. So the action, the object itself are more important. Now, when we change into passive, we need to remember the three elements that we need in any passive sentence. First of all, we have the object. We need to remember or to decide the number of the object, whether it's singular or plural. We have the verb to be, and we have the main verb in the past participle form. I always tell my students that when we change into passive voice, we are like 3-in-1. We become like CSI people. We analyze, we underline things. We become like fashionistas. We pick and choose, for example, the correct verb to be that matches the number of the object and the tense of the main verb. And sometimes we become as, like beggars. Sometimes we have to beg, we have to borrow, we have to ask for some words in order to make the sentence correct. Now, let's start with the first tense. For example, And by the way, I'm using the same sentence, changing the tense to see how it changes by time. Now, for example, when I say she writes stories, what are we supposed to do in here? Let's take the first step or the first character as CSI people. Let's analyze, let's underline the words that we need to change. The first thing we need to ask ourselves in here, that is, what's the tense of the main verb? Where's the verb? Writes. What's the tense? Present simple. Step number 2, we have to check the object, whether it's singular or plural, and we'll see why. Step number 3, we start with the object itself, the new sentence. So we start with stories, and stories in here is plural. Now the fashionistas, the stylist part comes. We need a verb to be that matches the tense in here and the number of the object. So if the tense is present simple and the object is plural, what verb to be that is needed in here? Of course, are. So we use are, and the last step, that is, we change the main verb into written, that is the past participle. And I'd like to remind you of the importance of learning by heart, remembering the forms of the verbs, especially irregular verbs. That is the infinitive, the past simple, the past participle, etc. We need them here. Now, the new sentence becomes stories are written. Notice that when the subject is an indefinite noun, pronoun. For example, she, he, they. Or an indefinite noun, for example, like someone, people, somebody. What about these subjects? We can simply drop them out in here. Now, we can say stories are written by her, but since it's indefinite, who's she in here, we can simply drop it out. So, again, check the tense of the main verb. That's number 1. Check the number of the object. Step 3, start the new sentence with the object. Step number 4, use the correct verb to be. And the last step, change the main verb into past participle. Now, if you look at past simple, same thing. Again, she wrote stories. Step number 1, check the tense of the verb. The verb is wrote and it's past simple. Check the object. Stories, plural. Start the new sentence with the object. Now I need a verb to be that is plural and in past, that is where. And of course, the main verb, past participle. Now, let's move to present continuous. If you look at the sentence in here, she is writing stories. The tense, present continuous. The object, again, stories. We start the new sentence with stories. We have are, of course, because it's present and it's plural. So we say are. And then, of course, written. Lots of students will say that this is the answer. But of course, we know that it's wrong. Why? Where is the ing in this sentence? We need the ing. True, we used are, that is verb to be. But it's present continuous. So I need to find a word to make it or to show the tense. Otherwise, there won't be any difference between present simple and present continuous then. So now we turn into beggars and we borrow the word being. So the new sentence becomes stories are being written. Being is used in here to keep the tense of the present continuous as is. Now, if you look at past continuous, same thing. She was writing stories. Again, you change the tense, you underline the tense, past continuous. I'm sorry, I skipped or forgot. Writing continuous, so past continuous. Now the object is plural, stories, stories were being written. Why being? In order to keep the continuous form. Now, if we move to present perfect. Now, here is the sentence. She has written stories. Now, you will notice the more examples we use, the more practice, the more we repeat the same steps, the clearer, the easier the whole thing, the whole process becomes. So she has written stories. Again, underline the tense and the verb, check the verb, has written, tense present perfect, simple. Stories, object, plural. Now start with stories. Now in present perfect, we need to keep the verb to have. And here is the rule, quick reminder, that with he, she, it, we use has. I, they, we, you, we use have. So that comes with the sentence. We cannot drop it off. So stories, object, plural, we use have. Now, what verb to be matches with the perfect tense? Of course, been. So the new sentence becomes, stories have been written. Same thing with past perfect. She had written stories, and look at the steps. Tense, object, start the new sentence with the object. Of course, we use or we keep had, then we use been with, of course, written, which is already in the participle form. Now, if we look at the sentence with modals, whether we're referring to future, like will, or when we use a modal verb, like must. She must write letters. Now, we all know that with modal verbs, the verb is infinitive. So we don't know the time. We don't know the tense of the action. And that's why we keep the modal verb as is. So the new sentence, as usual, begins with the object. Then we use the modal verb as is. And after that, we need to use be, because we all know after modal verbs, we use the infinitive form. So letters must be written. Now, we need to move to how to form negative in passive voice. It's important to know that in negative sentences, we add not to the verb to be when the tense is in present simple, the sentence are in present simple, past simple, present continuous, or past continuous. For example, she doesn't water the plant. So check the tense, doesn't water, present simple, the plant, object plural, singular. So we start with the plant. Notice how we dropped out doesn't, we don't need it anymore, and we replace it with verb to be. So remember, in negative, if the tense of the sentence is present simple or past simple, we drop out verb to do and we replace it with verb to be. As for past simple, past continuous, and present continuous, the verb to be is already there, so we add the not to it. So the plant is not watered. For example, another sentence. Let's say they didn't find the dog. What do we say? Let's do it orally. I haven't written this one. They, again, didn't find the dog. Where is the verb? Didn't find. What tense? Past simple. The dog, object, and plural. Let's start the new sentence with object, the dog. Drop out didn't and replace it with the verb to be. That is singular and past. So the dog was not found. Now, when we have the sentence in present and or past perfect, of course, the negative is added to verb to have itself. They haven't sent the report. So, haven't sent, present, perfect simple. The report, object, and singular. We start the new sentence with the object, the report. We use the correct verb to have, hasn't, with the negative, of course. We keep been. We don't drop it, of course. We need to add been, if you remember, as we mentioned before, and then the verb that is in verb 3. Now, let's move to some notes that we need to bear in mind. If the verb in active voice has two objects, this means that we have two possible answers. For example, I bought her some flowers. Now, we need to remember something. When a verb takes two objects, one of the objects must be like a human being, and the other one is a thing, an animal, a matter, whatever. So for human beings, they are called in grammar indirect object, and the thing is called direct object. Now let's see how it changes in passive when we have two objects. You have two objects. This means, again, that you have two possible answers. You check the tense, bought, past simple. Check the object. We have hair. Sorry, not hair, her. I bought her some flowers. So her in here, indirect object, and some flowers, the direct object. If we start with the object that is her, we never begin a sentence with an object pronoun. So her becomes she. So she, what verb to be matches with she? And past simple, of course, was. So she was bought some flowers. What if we wanted to start with some flowers? That is the direct object. Again, fine. Some flowers were bought. This time we need a preposition before the indirect object for her. So some flowers were bought for her. Which means now again we have two sentences. She was bought some flowers. If we start with the indirect object, that is the human being, or some flowers were bought for her, if we wanted to start with the direct object. Now, if the sentence has a preposition in the active sentence, we must keep it in the passive sentence. For example, we provided them with the necessary information. Now, again, we check the tense provided. In here, past simple. Them, the object, and we have with, that is the preposition. Whatever comes after it, we keep it as is. So, they were provided with the necessary information. And again, them as object in passive voice becomes as a subject pronoun, that is they. For example, if you have him, becomes he. We have her, becomes she. If we have us, it becomes we, etc. So they were provided with the necessary information. We do not drop out the prepositions in passive voice. Now, the last point for tonight, that is when the agent or the doer of the action is important to the meaning of the sentence. For example, when you have a specific person, when you have a specific person that has done the action, we keep the agent in the sentence. And we can see this when the sentence is about discoveries, inventions, or doesn't have to be a discovery or an invention. Any action with a specific person and I have a name for that agent, we keep it. For example, let's take this one. Penicillin was discovered by Alexander Fleming. I can't say just penicillin was discovered in, let's say, 1928. We don't say that. We need to say who discovered penicillin. Sorry. Now, don't worry, I don't have corona or anything. For example, when we say the file was stolen by Tom, if I have a specific agent, then we keep it in the sentence. That's all for tonight. Next time, inshallah, we will talk about causative forms and passive gerund and passive infinitive. Stay home, stay safe, and God protect you all. Bye.